this basically it picks up the Patuxent Research Refuge and those thousands of acres of that of those pine barrens lands that join the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, or BARC, property. And this is after our solstice walk on Sunday in a shell marl ravine forest, a calcareous coastal sand forest, just 20 miles south of DC, it just underscores what an amazingly special place Maryland is, and the greater Washington Baltimore region. In fact, it's really the most geologically and floristically diverse place in the eastern U.S., if not beyond. Really amazing place to go from the northern coastal pine barrens, such as the image we're looking at here, to shell marl ravine forest, calcareous marine deposits, and then you go from serpentinite to diabase to the Baltimore intrusives to, you name it. There's all sorts of things going on. So this the title "Endangered Pine Barrens Communities at Their Southernmost Global Extent in Maryland." The two counties, which we'll see, northern Prince George's County and Arundel County, Maryland, are really the southernmost extent of the New Jersey Pine Barrens communities, or northern coastal Pine Barrens communities. And these extend pretty much from Cape Cod down through Long Island, really out on these coastal sort of islands or peninsulas that extend down to the vast sand deposits in those two Maryland counties. There are some on the eastern shore, but they're really not as well developed as these ones on Maryland's western shore. So let me see, we got here, that slideshow worked. Okay. Go back one, I think. Nope. Okay, sorry. So this area in orange there, the western shores upland region, is where we're talking about. You can see the Chesapeake Bay there. And you get to the upland section just to the northwest of the western shore is Piedmont. All that's Piedmont proper. And then the yellow is the eastern shore, Delmarva. So the story of the Washington-Baltimore region pine barrens begins with geology. These deep sands of the lower Cretaceous Potomac Formation, that's the modern name for it. In the older maps for Maryland, you'll see Patuxent Formation is the exact same thing. Within the sand belt of northern Prince George's and Anne Arundel counties. Now that's the old name. You go back to this 120-year-old, 110-year-old soil maps for those counties and others, and that's what they called the region. And it's in orange there. That's not all that sand, but it's sand and gravel. Unconsolidated. You've got mostly it's small gravels, and then some deposits of really heavy sand, but it's not, continuous throughout those two orange parts of the map. Here's what this sand looks like. On the left, we've got the old historic photo of the really deep sand pit of white sand east of Fort Totten Park in DC. That's all white sand there, excavated, of course, very valuable for lots of different uses in industry and building and such. On the bottom right, that's a recent photo of the white sugar sand at the right next to right in the footprint pretty much of the old historic powder mill bog #1, and in Prince George, in the extreme corner of BARC at Prince George's County. Really a fine-grained, uniformly fine-grained white sand. The characteristic tree of the pine barrens, both in the northern coastal pine barrens, is pitch pine, Pinus rigida, and that's true for Cape Cod, Massachusetts, for Long Island, New York, for the bulk of the pine barrens in New Jersey, meaning that that's where the largest acreage of this community occurs, and then down here in the 2 Maryland counties we're talking about. In the DC area, the greater DC region, it's very rare to find pitch pine as a dominant community component. And it occurs on these deep, vast Cretaceous sand deposits. And all of the natural communities that are associated with this or allied with this with pitch pine in this area are globally rare. And just a little farther, once you get into Virginia on the northern neck and then moving southwards, loveloid pine becomes dominant. And then when you get into extreme southeastern Virginia and through the Carolinas and farther south, then you get into the longleaf pine communities, which largely are there's a lot of it. There's some good acreage left, but a lot of it's been destroyed. But some really good places still remaining, but minuscule compared to what once was. So those are really the 3 pine species that occur on the sand deposits in the coastal plain. So here's what some of these look like. Here's one from this is a pine barrens, pine oak woodland at the Cape Cod National Seashore. These are large old pines, virtually identical in appearance to what you find in Jersey and in Maryland. And here's one in southern New Jersey. This one is, you see black huckleberry, these nearly continuous colonies of these low heath shrubs. They're deciduous heaths. Heath plants are ericads or ericaceous plants of the heath family, which is Ericaceae. And this is black huckleberry. A lot of times you find dangleberry or Gallicacea frondosa mixed in. Got lowbush blueberry, Vaccinium pallidum. Some places farther north you go, you get the northern lowbush blueberry in stands, and that's the Vaccinium angustifolium. Now remember, the farther you go to the coast, and if you're right on the ocean or very close, the climate is very temperate. So, for example, the climate of Cape Cod is virtually the same as Anne Arundel County, Maryland. You get on the mainland of Massachusetts, and that's completely different. You've got a very different, harsher climate there. It's more like Berlin, Germany. But when you're in the coastal plain, you've got the maritime conditions give you a very moderate climate. So things like for instance, in this photo here, you've got American holly, which is intolerant of cold, dry air. And these are all pitch pine, of course, and you can see a lot of scarlet oak in here. Those are some of your co-dominant species. And here's one in Maryland, right? This is National Park Service property right along the BW Parkway, right at the west side of the parkway at the Powder Mill Road Parkway interchange there. All the way to the left of the photo here, a nice old scarlet oak, and those are pitch pine mixed in. Fall color of the black huckleberry in there, really nice continuous colonies, really special community. A lot of people look at this and just think, you know, the uninitiated would look at this and say, oh, it's just good old, it's just woods, you know, great place to build, it's flat. You know, trees are well spaced, it's not that dense a forest, just, you know, bulldoze it out, which is sadly what's happened to a lot of land that was formerly this type in Maryland. So here's an overview of the 5 farms, so-called farms at the BARC site. That's the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. By far, the 2 largest are the blue here, in the center. That's a central farm, and all the way to the right is the east farm. And that's Arundel Road goes pretty much right through the middle of it. This is all, these properties are in all of BARC is in the upper Anacostia River watershed. And all of Patuxent is in the Patuxent watershed. And here's the Patuxent Research Refuge. North Tract, Central Tract, South Tract, and on the east side of the BW Parkway, northeast of, but adjoining the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. And between the 2 of these monster properties, you've got, you know, probably a good 15,000 plus acres of pine barrens habitat. So it's pretty obvious that there's a lot of considerable acreage of this community around. Folks have known about it for a long, long time. Certainly the locals who lived in this area. When the botanists got involved in it and started collecting, which wasn't that long ago, it was really after the Civil War, decades after the Civil War. And a lot of this land was just inaccessible and just cut off from so-called civilization. Didn't have any roads through here. They were horse roads, but they really weren't anything. You just didn't get out into these areas. There's just vast land. There were some large, most of them were large estates. And a lot of land that just wasn't suitable for agriculture. And folks just didn't, you know, you could easily get lost just walking around in vast areas, and there wasn't much opportunity for transportation to these sites. So in the last decades of the 19th century and the very early decades of the 20th century, a lot of this just wasn't known. And then you know, when USDA settled at BARC, and then the Patuxent Research Refuge was formed in the early, I guess, late 20s, 30s. You know, you had folks like Neil Hotchkiss and Fran Euler and others who were biologists that actually went out and inventoried things. On the BARC side of things, they really didn't have, that was agriculture. So you really didn't have anybody like Neil Hotchkiss with BARC doing this kind of stuff. But you had Neil and a couple others. Neil was a really good botanist, and he published the flora of the Patuxent Research Refuge in 1940. After a bunch of years of surveys and collecting. And he got the community type, in community ecology didn't exist in these days. Nobody classified this stuff as pine barrens really much, even though we knew about the New Jersey pine barrens and everybody knew what they were. Colloquially, as far as science and vegetation ecology just didn't exist. And regular ecology had a hard enough time getting off the ground, let alone vegetation ecology. So, so a lot of this stuff was bean counting and just collecting different species, trying to get a handle on things. And Hotchkiss did a really good job with that. He noted that Pinus rigida was abundant all through the Patuxent site, and that the loblolly pine, as expected, was rare, and he just had it on a couple woods margins. So, because this is both bark and Patuxent are a little bit are a little north of loblolly's natural range, as Pinus tita is loblolly. So things sat for a long time, and then in the 50, 60 years, pretty much, and then in the first bark flora that I know of, I believe is the annotated list of the flora of the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, and that was in the published in 2000 from flora surveys in the 90s. Now there was no there was vegetation ecology even in the 90s was still in its infancy, and moreover, it just wasn't done for these sites, even if it there just wasn't anybody doing that. Despite the fact that the botanists, some of the lead botanists on that project were shown otherwise, they still confused pitch pine for loblolly pine. And that makes all the difference in the world, because it basically which sends you in a whole different direction from pine barrens and from vegetation ecology and community classification into just a hodgepodge of flora that doesn't make any sense at all. And nature does make sense. You can pretty much always find a community, even a disturbed one, and even an artificial one, in once you start thinking that way, and certainly, and that of course depends on getting the core species correctly identified, of course. And so you can see here the loblolly pine was noted as common everywhere, and the pitch pine was rare. I just noted for one little section of BARC, the coniferous research forest. And in 2005, a couple of us got a small grant from NatureServe to survey and document the flora of the upper Anacostia watershed. And that's when the first time these pine barrens communities were actually documented properly. They were correctly identified, and they were put into the United States National Vegetation Classification. And for the first time in Maryland's history, in the region's history, were actually classified in the USNBC, and we published them in the spring 2008 issue of Marylandica. That's online in the publications for the MNPS publications link on their webpage, and of course NatureServe report as well, which isn't quite as detailed as the Marylandica. So out of all that, we get this globally rare type, this pine barrens pine oak woodland, and coastal plain pine oak woodland, and and that when you get to the absolute southern end of its range, these things become even rarer. It's like a buffer kind of thing. In the center of it, it's still rare. That's rare in New Jersey, but in the DC region, you could just bump those numbers up quite a bit, way over S3. I don't agree with the state. The S is the state. The G is a global rank. So G2, G3, that's globally imperiled. S3 is a state watch list. A lot of the stuff in Cecil County and in the Eastern Shore that have pitch pine in them were all lumped into this type. I don't believe they are the same. So I would like to exclude some of that if I were doing it, but it's still a rare community, even if you do include. That's your upland habitat. We have another type here. Maryland's good. We got a good state community ecologist and team in Maryland, Jason Harrison and company. When we're trying to classify these communities, we're really relying on New Jersey. Virginia doesn't have any of this, so we're relying on New Jersey pretty much as the center of it, and maybe some of the Massachusetts and Long Island stuff, but still the bulk of it's New Jersey's. And New Jersey hasn't worked out as much of this vegetation ecology as one might expect them or think they have. And so there's a couple types that are segregates of this that we have in Maryland too. There's a more mesic type, or xeric is dry, mesic is sort of middle. It's moist sometimes of the year, and then hydric is wet most of the time. So there's a mesic type of this upland coastal plain pine oak woodland that's about all over bark and Patuxent, but we really haven't put that in yet. And then we got these non-alluvial wetlands. Those are wetlands that are seeps and bogs, basically, and upland depression swamps. They're basically not associated at all with a stream or a floodplain. And we got a bunch of these here. I'm not going to read through all these things, and just note that occasionally I have some text-heavy slides in these presentations, and I put those in so that people don't have to write down everything or try to remember everything, or wonder if they're going to forget something, and ask you. It's all there. It's recorded, and you can archive this later and have it there with all the spellings and everything ranks. So I don't typically read all this stuff. So here's a nice look at this community. This is on the central farm at BARC. Amazing view, wide angle shots here. How widely spaced these trees are, and the dominant oak is scarlet oak, which is probably the most light demanding oak of any of the ones we have, and so it's spaced here nicely to allow lots of light, and just a incredibly interesting and special community. In the bottom photo here, you see this monster pitch pine, this sticking up in the middle of right dead center of the image there. This is mostly black huckleberry that we're looking at in the understory, or the shrub layer, sorry. Top left photo, charcoal, it's fire. People have made way too much about fire, and if they just, if they hear the word pine, they think everything burned, it's all fire. No, it's not all fire. The fire cycle wasn't, or the fire frequency, I should say, is not all that great in the DC area historically. Sure, there's some fires, And so here's a shot of John Parrish with some charcoal here, but one of the old some old stump on this on the east farm here, but that's a minor component of the I think catastrophic drought, or what we mean by that is long periods of drought. It could be 100 years, 200, 300, 500 years, such as which it wasn't that long ago, for instance, in the Southwest. That's what a lot of anthropologists believe that drove the Anasazi out of southwestern U.S. was just a catastrophic drought, sent them down to Central America. They just couldn't live in an arid community. So here, these are the sort of the typical look of these pine barrens, pine oak woodland communities. When you get down to the wetter areas, sometimes you get even larger pitch pine, and there's massive old age pitch pine throughout the Central Farm and East Farm at BARC, just some really huge pines. And so on the left here is got a monster one here at the East Farm, and then the right is a large one at the Central Farm. Damian Ossie here is measuring this guy. This is with the Greenbelt Biota group, one of our more active field trip groups out here. Anybody's welcome, by the way, to join along on these walks. Try to make them available to folks. We don't have huge tours, but we do have some larger groups that do this. We try to do these 6 or more times a year. So try to make these available to anybody. All are welcome. Within that pine barrens, pine oak, heath, woodland type, we have this subset of sort of a even drier kind of community that's on like a little knoll, and really there's no relief here on these pine barrens. They're rolling uplands at best. It's not flat, but it's not hilly either. It's not very rolling. It's large. I guess it's mostly flat. But on some of these little sand rises, I guess, you have chinkapin oak. Dwarf chinkapin oak. Big difference between the chinkapin oak we saw at Shellmarl, which is a limestone calcareous loving species, and this is an acidic sand loving species, or acidic soil species. And it's more often than not, the Quercus prinoides is shrubby, doesn't really grow into certainly not a large tree, but it can become a tree, in which we'll see in a minute. These are sort of open. These are even more open. They're pine dominant, meaning we don't have a lot of codominant oak in the canopy. We don't have we don't have any scarlet oak in these communities, really. We don't have, maybe there's a southern red oak or two, but it's not, doesn't have a lot of mass to it. And as you can see in this image, mostly pitch pine, and which gives nice light, because the pitch pine, none of the pitch pines produce, no matter how big they are, produce much of a crown, whether they're in a bog or in the uplands. And so that gives good light to these light demanding species like sassafras that is intolerant of shade. And that is, in fact, when you walk into these communities, you'll see the sassafras are like, they're understory trees here, and they're growing almost like in a circuit, like a gnarled circular kind of way. They're looking for the light, and so that gives them a sort of a, they've got a really squirrely kind of growth pattern, because they're always shifting to the light. And you got the chinkapin, dwarf chinkapin oak in the understory, and then right with it is a an associate is the chinkapin, the Castanea pumila. And those guys are pretty much the 4 species in this community. That has not been, this type here has not been segregated out either from this broader community type. So, you get into a lumper splitter kind of thing, and I think it's important to recognize these distinctions in these habitats. We may not need to formally go to a whole different community type, but there's clearly a lot more going on in these than just one big broad upland type. And so, you're calculating the age, trying to calculate, get a beat on the age of these communities, which are ancient, and even the above ground stuff, very old. And on the left here, we have the national champion dwarf chinkapin oak. And you can see where that green, if it will kind of maybe be able to see at the bottom of the oak has got a little green ribbon on it, on a sprout. And there's a lot of sprouts coming off around this oak. And that's a big clue. Took us a while to figure out, John Parrish and I, a while to figure this thing out, because it clearly is not its close cousin, the Quercus muhlenbergii, which is a rich, it loves base-rich soils. It's just not going to grow in sand, and nor will it ever have a bunch of shrub sprouts all around its base. So that, with the acorns and all the other stuff, is how we determined this thing. It's just a very old specimen. On the right, we have state champion sand hickory, and that's just it's not very far from here. We have a lot of champion size pitch pine and others here, including maybe some chinkapin as well. That helps with the age. So you got a lot of interesting things. And then, you have the northern elements. Remember, these are the southernmost extent of a northern community. And northern means farther than Baltimore, obviously. We're talking good 150 miles north, 125 miles north, 50 miles in New Jersey. And so you get the top left is the northern lowbush plumeri vaccini mangustifolium, northern montane illinois. You find that in the mountains a lot. It's the only known station and collection in Maryland, in the coastal plain. Maryland coastal plain is from the Lemons Bridge area at Patuxent Research Refuge North Tract. And you can see on the right is the specimen, E.C. Leonard specimen, at the U.S. National Herbarium at the Smithsonian. And bottom left is pitch pine bog or swamp along the old Lemons Bridge Road, right on the north tract, and could very easily have been the habitat where this species was found. As far as threats to the area, there's our friend up at Patuxent, biologist Sandy Spencer, informed me a couple months ago that there's a lot coming down the pike, a lot that's planned for widening or expanding Bowie State College, and the expansion in the Bowie area of those lands. That's really a special area in there, and something to watch, and to take, and for the Plant Society and others to be vigilant, because That's how we lose big chunks of property, because nobody values it at all. Certainly not the sort of thing we're discussing here. But this is an example of probably an ice age element that has persisted for a long time. Obviously, the climate it's not able to compete. This Vaccinium angustifolium is not able to compete with Vaccinium pallidum and some of the other flora that's more suited to our climate here, even though we're not really much different than New Jersey. But there just wasn't as much of material around relative to the other stuff that we see. And so you have this really rare occurrence where it's much more common north of us. But it's a good clue or indicator of the northern aspect of these pine barrens in our area. This is a semi-open sandy glade, naturally. Great habitat for light-demanding graminoids or grass-like plants and very low diminutive wildflowers. Literally, this image here is the in the footprint of a proposed 50-acre maglev train yard, basically a place to dump tracks and stuff that they need, and a maintenance yard. 50 acres, not including access and construction and all that other stuff, and certainly not including all the crud that leaches out of it and washes out of the footprint into these wetlands. This image here also is perched atop some really, really rare, pristine wetlands. And it's a horrible place to even consider putting any kind of development, let alone a train yard. So some notable flora of the upland semi-open sandy glades. I sort of broke the flora down into different groups: upland, wetland, etc. A lot of these are historical, but not all of them. And some of it we're still working on, like the Dicanthelium aciculare. A number of folks, Rob Noxie, Richard LeBlond, Chris Fry, the Maryland State botanist, and taking a closer look at this. And it's a difficult group to work with, but those panic grasses, some of them, and it turns out we probably have some new things there that we didn't know about. So, we're still working through some of these things. The Euphorbia marylandica, that was you can see 1924. It was published in the American Midland Naturalist, and but it was later lumped with Euphorbia correlata, which it decidedly is not. And it's an example of something being lost to science because of lumping, and that needs to be dealt with. But as Euphorbiaceae specialist and curator at the Smithsonian, Ken Werdak, says, there's just not a lot of folks getting into the Euphorbiaceae and working on that sort of stuff. So, it's a lot of things like that going on, and we need to, be persistent. But there's a lot of flora out there that's still not well understood. A lot of it very rare. Here's one of the pristine wetlands. This is boggy habitat, but it's not a bog per se. You can see it's like a seepage rill. It's sphagnous. It's cutting through this sand swale here. Pitch pine all around. A lot of red maple in here. It's a wetland, obviously. We don't have this name I put down here. is the name from our study years ago, but it's unofficial. This is unranked. We need to, ideally, we need to get a couple plots, 400 square meter USNBC plots here to put into the database and get this on the map. But apart from that, it is globally rare, as all these pitch pine communities are, and it has very rare elements in it, plants and animals. In this case, the top right, the small white fringed orchid Anthera glottis, beautifully pristine community. You can see it here. I mean, you probably never get to see something like this anywhere else. I don't know. I'm sure the New Jersey Pine Barrens probably have some places like this. I've never seen anywhere else in Maryland, even on Patuxent, that have this kind of a landscape. And these are under the very low old power lines. I'm not sure they're even used anymore, but on the east farm at BARC. And you can see this is all pure sand, almost no gravel in BARC. These deep sand. These are called the power line bogs, number 1 and 2. They're amplified a bit because they get, it's not a wide power line at all. It's just probably 60 feet wide, 75 feet wide at the most. But and they're the power line is just probably 40 feet or so, 50 feet max. But it does allow a lot of light demanding species to flourish, so it's valuable. Here's with that last image in mind, here's one priceless photograph, historic photograph by Waldo Lee McAtee, W.L. McAtee, of Powder Mill Bog number 1 from 1909. And you see that the substrate here, that's white sand with water on top of it, shallow water and sphagnum and other stuff, sundews and things growing on it, but it's reflecting, white. It's all white sands like we saw earlier in that image that was from this, firstly from the same spot. This site is underneath, actually probably both 495 and I-95 at the extreme edge of the north farm, northwestern edge, extreme northern edge of the north farm at BARC. And I think that McAtee was stationed here at this time, and that's how he discovered this, because they used to have an old field station here for the USDA folks when McAtee was working here, and it's called one of the names for it was the U.S. Horticultural Cabin. And you can see this is a successional landscape. Somebody obviously had come in here and skimmed off some of that white sand. Maybe a property owner before it went to USDA. This was way out in the country back then. Nobody cared about this land at all. Only a botanist, would have even considered valuing or appreciating this kind of, the flora here and the fauna, that's really the flora, and the community. McAtee certainly did, and everybody else, and their brother basically descended on this place and collected it to death in a way, even though there was loads of stuff here. You can look at the back. This looks like it's facing just west, southwest, or just due west. And a lot of that's Virginia pine and pitch pine around the rim of this thing, and it's short. They're not tall trees. So obviously this is a successional landscape, and what happened here was somebody dug into gently dug into the Ice Age and pulled up all this stuff, all this northern bayberry, all the Eric Collin, the pipewort, the sundews, all this stuff that just flourished now that it was exposed. The orchids, one of the richest bog sites known anywhere in Maryland. And the thing about that is once that can, the hydrology was intact, and you get a few decades of that, but then it eventually returns to the pines take over, and it returns to a different kind of community. This is not a fire landscape. This wasn't just magically kept clean by fire, nor do the Indians just prepare this nicely for 19th century botanists, actually early 20th century botanists, because this wasn't known in the 19th century. Anyway, this type is not a fall line magnolia bog. It's allied to the pine barrens. Well, it's allied to the types of bogs or wetlands we know from BARC and Patuxent to a lesser extent. The fall line magnolia bog is a pine barrens community too, but that's a gravel bog, sand and gravel bog. So here we are on the linkage farm below the central farm at BARC, and in a gigantic acidic seepage swamp. And this type here, which is well known and well classified, documented, doesn't really fit perfectly with what is here, but it's the best we have, and it's not incongruent, so we keep it. This is John Parish in the center here with a big block of pure peat, and this little really beautiful little seepage stream or braid. It's not even a stream, it's just a braid of many braids connected together to a larger stream. Forms Indian Creek, or a part of Indian Creek, flows into Indian Creek. This is just centuries or millennia of natural peat deposition. It's one gigantic peat bog, it's our peat swamp. And here's a similar habitat on the East Farm. This is the famous Beltsville Airport bog, or the airport bog. And this is actually not the bog. The bog was, they built that in the site in the late 20s, early 30s, the airport. And what they did was the same thing they did at the McAtee photo with the Powder Mill bog. They just scooped out, cleared an area, cleared some of the pine and the vegetation out, and you have this shallow little swale. They weren't digging anything or mining anything. And again, a lot of the same flora that we find at Powder Mill pops up, northern bayberry, lots of stuff like that, that has never been seen again, or not for 80 years. And again, you're digging into a historic seed bank, and then once it reverts back to the swamp, like this image here, the stuff is kept. So a lot of this is sweet bay magnolia. There's a lot of Canada Amelanchier canadensis, Canada Surasbury in here. A lot of pitch pine. You can see the skunk cabbage. Skunk cabbage like this, where it's dominant, is a dead giveaway that you're dealing with a swamp, not a bog, because a bog is more diverse. You have a lot more species diversity, plant diversity in a bog than you do in a swamp. Swamp is very valuable community, but it's just not floristically as diverse. You can see in the bottom right that iron-rich water, iron oxide bacteria turning that orange. A lot of poison sumac in this thing too. John, I know, is carefully navigating that. A new community type that we found in this our surveys upper Anacostia watershed is this Pine Barrens lowland forest. And that was completely new to Maryland. And there's some big tracts of that, on the BARC East Farm. Haven't found it on the Central Farm or west of the East Farm. And I don't know if it occurs on Patuxent. Basically, the BARC site is, I believe, has more of the deep sands than the farther east you go, you start trending upward in elevation, and you start picking up a lot more gravel. So when you go to the Patuxent North Tract, you're getting a lot more gravel there mixed in with the sand, a lot less deep sand deposits than you do in BARC in Prince George's County. And so now near the Maglev River, and you get the deep sands there. But when as you start going up the fall line or up I-95 or Route 1 going northeast, you're losing the sand and you're picking up gravel. And you still have the pitch pine communities, but they're not nearly as well developed as the ones where you have the deep sand belt. So this is the type, and the plant that's really the diagnostic here is clethra. Clethra, and it's basically in this image, it's all that yellow, low yellow plant. The reason it's so low is the deer love this, and they just chomp it down to like knee-high at best, uniformly. That's another good clue that you've got something weird going on. In this case, it's white-tailed deer over browse. But this type is a clethra type. And you find this in places that they're low, that really much lower than landscape, where you've got a lot good moisture, where it's wetter than the uplands, even if it's just a little bit of not very far in elevation below the uplands. Here's a really hot July day. This vast abandoned beaver impoundment along Beaver Dam Creek on the East Farm. This has got a lot of clethra growing in it, rice cut grass, etc. This was formerly the type we just saw, the clethra lowland Pine Barrens type that got impounded and back flooded by the beaver impoundments, beaver dams, and then basically it turned into a gigantic wet meadow. And but it's been going on for a long time, because the peat is very deep here. It's very difficult to walk through this. So won't read through all this, but the notable flora, acidic seepage, wetlands, and bogs. This both Patuxent and BARC. A little more to BARC. We'll just look at the bog huckleberry here, Galisacea demosa, bar bigeloviana. I still call it that. I don't really accept the new name for it as a separate species. I don't think we know enough about it to determine that. I know it's been published in Flora of North America, and then we had it again in another paper where the keys separating it from demosa, bar demosa, were further kind of discussed, but presented. But I think Fernald had this perfectly correct. That's really a northern taxon. And another link between the airport bog, as you can see, Neil Hodges collected this in 1946 from the shrub sedge bog on the southwest side of the Beltsville Airport. And it was also collected at the Powder Mill Bog sites, the Powder Mill Bog number 1, I should say. So good, it's also at the Suitland Bog. and other places in Maryland too, historically. I think the only extant population in Maryland is at Suitland, except Wes Knapp, who rediscovered it there, does not believe in, at least I want to make sure I don't get this wrong, I don't think he believes in var bigeloviana, so he calls it just Demosa var demosa, I believe. So that's why it may not show up in the atlas, but look at that again. And there's a lot, so you can see the wetlands are diverse, so there's quite a lot of flora that are in these wetlands. A lot of it historic, but a lot of it still extant, and some new things like rabbit-eye blueberry. You can see John Parrish is working on that. We've got a noteworthy collections paper in prep on that thing. It's a southern blueberry. And some other things. This is a really, really rare habitat here. This is another wetland. It's non-alluvial. This is a coastal plain depression swamp on the east, on the central farm. It's large, it's really clean, really a special place. These are all the upland depression swamps are globally rare. You can see that we're still working these out. So this state, the SNR, the state not ranked, means we really don't know. We really haven't, we don't have enough of these around to really get a good, robust data set to discuss them. So, but they're globally rare, as you can see the G3, and they're very special. And we certainly don't need any intrusion in them. This is the sandy road edges, power lines, woodland edges and openings support a lot of light demanding rarities, disjunct one like this grass leaf, golden aster, Pidiopsis graminifolia, var latifolia, lots of other things, American ipecac, just a lot of really cool stuff. I'm not going to read through all of this, but there's a lot of good flora that you find here. It's a lot of specialized plants and animals, mainly insects, that grow here. And there was a good question earlier, or comment earlier, while we were opening the doors to folks to the presentation about the pine snake, and from somebody who was friends of the National Zoo. And my friend, retired reptile curator Mike Davenport of the National Zoo, told me decades ago of an old historic record of pine snake for BARC, and great habitat, and it's a vast habitat. So there's every every possibility that that there's populations or individuals remaining or thriving the pine snake in there. A lot of people really aren't surveying these areas. I mean, we don't want the wrong kind of surveys and intrusion into a place, but carefully done, it's very much needed. And that brings us to this. There's significant acreage at BARC remains undocumented, and almost all of it's just undervalued, not by the kindred folks who work for BARC. They love it, and they're doing their best behind the scenes and otherwise to protect the place. Their fellow federal agencies have just zero appreciation for the place. And you can imagine what folks in Congress or state reps or whoever, the governor, et cetera, just, could care less. And it's to them, to the folks like that, it's just just woods or just green, something that's in the way of profit and development and schemes and agendas and whatever. And so they see things in this sort of a polarized way where, you know, a wetland is in their way, or, you know, how close can I get to this spot? And you know, check the boxes that we've, you know, saved it while trashing pretty much everything around it. Our groups that the Greenbelt Biota and the Maglev survey groups, you can see the bottom left photo there. We've been doing a lot of that. These folks have been doing this on their own as well, apart from Maglev and other stuff. And on the right, we've got the beetles and botany group. That's Jill and Warren's group here with Jonathan Maudsley, collecting some interesting pine barrens, beetles, and such. And you know, just a nice note from deceased Smithsonian botanist Emeritus Stan Shetler. A very important message. A lot of people don't focus on this so much anymore. There are only 3 rules for saving species: save habitat, and save habitat. As opposed to restoration and, gee, what can we plant? Or how can I gussy a place up or have artificial diversity by planting, you know, my favorite plants in a spot, or all that kind of stuff. And that's really not conservation biology, and that's not ecological restoration. A lot of these places, just staying out of them, managing for non-native invasive plants, and keeping ghastly disturbance like maglev and beltway widenings and stuff like that out of these places, and that's you know, usually more than enough to preserve them in perpetuity. So, thank you all. Any questions, I guess?
Thanks, Rod. Wonderful, very, very comprehensive.
So some of these rare pine barren habitats that you pointed out today, are any of them going to be destroyed by the Bureau of Engraving? Do you know?
I don't know, but a lot of different agencies, like for instance, back in the 20 years ago, Homeland Security walloped a lot of this, you know that 150 plus acres of near Powder Mill Road of just cookie cut out. So George W. Bush could ride his bike around quietly around a rink or a loop around the building there that's just barbed wire and big fence. So, you know, that sort of thing happens over and over again, and I wouldn't be surprised if Bureau of Engraving is involved. It isn't one of the many in the queue, you know, salivating at this cheap free government land. You know, remember USDA and Department of Interior are probably the 2 poorest, most underappreciated, abused entities in the you know, relative to Department of Defense and Department of Transportation. So, you know, that's a huge problem, and we lost half of the old age forest joining the Arlington National Cemetery because of Department of Defense and some folks in Congress who just beat up the National Park Service. So that's always going on.
So the fact that it's globally rare would not be enough to stop construction?
No, because they're always, you know, then comes in that magic, you know, palliative mitigation, and so you get folks like, well, you know, we're going to mitigate this, and we're gonna restore the habitat. You know, this is a temporary disturbance, and then when we're done trashing with bulldozers, we're going to come in here and plant natives, you know, and you know, it's just nonsense. So no, that it's, I mean, no, I don't have any hope. The thing is just to stay out of it. And if they see opportunity and free land, cheap, easy land, low-hanging fruit is I think what people call it, they'll just take it.
And can the Plant Society oppose it?
Sure, they can, and I think we have in some cases, and we probably will do so even more. It's tough. You know, it's tough, and the more you lay on the table, for instance, like Plummer's Island, you know, in you know, American Legion Bridge, the Beltway widening, Hogan's boutique project there, like this Maglev is a boutique project, serves nobody but just a very small group of entrepreneurs' pocketbooks. But I mean, this is not a public interest or public service project by no means. Neither is widening the Beltway. You know, and you know, when I'm writing up these reports, Mark, this is just you know, something to think of, not to dissuade any interest in this, but you know, if you add in, like, you know, like in the case of Plummer's Island, we've got several dozen rare species there, globally rare habitats, et cetera, in a very small area. And you put that all on a paper, and then, you know, it's almost like a surfeit of richness. It's I don't know if how, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know how well that's received by these people who are doing the environmental impact statements or the draft EISs, who generally are not qualified to do them. We got, you know, most of the people doing these are not the folks that, you know, in on this presentation here. They're folks that are working for a design and build company. They're, you know, your state hires people that are working, that are the folks that are going to develop the place to do the scientific analysis, or at least to collate all the information together. And they just have zero, oftentimes, just, or, you know, very, very little experience and expertise in this. But yes, we should sign on to Plummer's Island and the Maryland Indian Plant Society, that is, and the other things. Sierra Club's been very helpful on this, as they usually are. There are a lot of groups with against the Maglev projects, and it's sort of gone to ground for the moment, but they're never really out of the picture.
Was there a rediscovery of isoides in the work you've been doing?
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah, we were there a couple, you know, I guess it was just a year ago, on a December walk for Maglev, and beautiful, pristine seepage stream. I think it's called North Creek. I think it's largely unnamed. Anyway, in the upper part of it, it's you have this sphagnous area, and then it drops to this clay, and then right in the stream, very shallow water, you've got all these little isoides. Of course, you know, it was December, so we didn't have any diagnostic material. But Clyde Reed had identified a Neil Hotchkiss specimen, I believe, from the 60s or 50s, from Patuxent next door, and as isoides Engelmannii, sorry. And so almost surely that's what this is. But, you know, whenever you find those in the coastal plain, it's pretty rare. They're old, and it's really more of a plant of the Piedmont and the farther out. So nice, good, robust stand of them there. And the also another another nice natural history item in that same stream is a huge population of the brook lamprey. You know, a lot of different life histories of flora and fauna in these lands.
So yeah, we were talking, this is talking about poolwarts, just in case anybody missed what ISO it is. There were quite a number of questions during your presentation about how do we get access? Can anybody get access to any of these areas so they can walk through them? I think there's also probably a suggestion of can we organize field trips to get out there to look? Maybe yourself, Rod, and some others that really know the spaces can actually take groups out there so that they can actually see some of these places, so they can get a better appreciation of them. It's hard to get a really good appreciation from slides, but it actually is really good to stand in amongst it.
Yes, thank you. That well, the Greenbelt Biota Group has received, they've got permission to meet and to regularly meet and walk the site and survey the site. You know, working with USDA, the BARC folks, to make sure that everything is as it should be. One of the main things is obviously in the the hunting season to avoid to not be there in an area where there's hunting, because they have a robust deer management program there, deer hunting, which is good to try to keep the population down. And it's not, you probably shouldn't just go park there and walk around. They do have security there, and the security won't understand really what's going on, whether it's posted or not. Some of the land, a lot of the lands are posted, so it's probably best not to do that. And so as I mentioned earlier, we do want to ramp up our field trips here. So I'd like to see, you know, maybe it's like 6 walks a year, or maybe more, that the Plant Society co-sponsors with Greenbelt Biota Group, to where we can get to these different sites, and folks are welcome, and we can, you know, the habitat, we don't walk through the middle of the sensitive area, any sensitive area. So so for instance, we wouldn't walk through a sphagnum bog or a peatland or something like that. We walk around the edges of it. And we've had some large, fairly large groups, so we can take 20 or 25 in some of these places pretty well. And the easiest way is to just work with the folks that have already, you know, got a system worked out, the Greenbelt Biota folks, and that's worked out real well. So we just, I guess, developed that for the Plant Society. For Patuxent, the Bill Harms up at the North Tract used to lead walks for people, but in the same manner, and have folks in there. The North Tract is a little more laid back, I think, than the Central or the South. I know that if you go park at the visitor center, you know, you're welcome to walk around and go to the herbarium there, which is really good. That's where and spend some time there. But they really don't want you walking off any kind of a road or a trail. And if they see you, they'll squawk at you. So it's probably best just to, you know, do it the way we've got it set up. And so we'll try to get them advertised and opened up, and you know, I guess we just discussed how many folks we can have on each one, and then, you know, maybe up to 25 or something like that. And then
Okay, sounds like we'll start to have field trips out to BARC maybe in 2 months' time, maybe, and then periodic after that. So watch out for those notices on the website, and also probably be put onto Facebook so that we can get that message out.
Thanks for an absolutely fascinating talk. I appreciate that. I was just wondering if there are any native azaleas in these ericaceous areas, you know, like viscosum or paracleminoides or atlanticum, etc.
That's a good question. Not atlanticum. That's purely Eastern Shore. That's not known at all from the Western Shore, even though people. Sometimes when folks find there are some really old varieties of viscosum, and some of them are short or low. Some of them have blue-green foliage. Some of them have quite a glaucous underside leaf, and are very small leaved. And and they're pink flowered, a lot of those ones, and those varieties, and they're not so trumpet shaped. They're more L shaped, more like they're not honeysuckle shaped like the pinkster flower, rhododendron paracleminoides, but they're not tubular like that, or like classic viscosum. There are varieties of viscosum, and so when you see a report for that, like Charles County or Anne Arundel, oh yeah, we got Atlanticum here, it's one of those viscosums.
They smell different.
They do smell different, and the interesting thing with those varieties is that they bloom quite a bit earlier than the June blooming viscosum. And just straight, the classic viscosum, I'll call it. And I've found big colonies of that stuff in Alexandria some places in Northern Virginia, like at the Winkler Botanical Preserve, where I used to work back in the early 90s. And in fact, we had a Pine Barrens botanist who was our first botanist there at Winkler, and they saw that, discovered it. It was so atypical from true viscosum or classic viscosum that they put down rhododendron atlanticum, until they finally just went away. And I always wondered if that wasn't some kind of a hybrid between ancient natural hybrid between paracleminoides and viscosum. So, getting back to your question at the Pine Barrens, I haven't seen much of any of those three. In the wetlands, you'll find viscosum around. You'll find it in the boggy areas. But where you really find those three, actually the two viscosums are in the magnolia bogs. So it's interesting that the rhododendrons have not really. It's a huckleberry vaccinium community. It's the rhododendrons have not really are rare components of the Pine Barrens, which is interesting. It's a good question.
Well, thanks. I mean, I was kind of wondering if they were there, and it was kind of a rare instance, if we can get the Azalea Society and the Rhodie Society involved, but I guess not.
For the magnolia bogs, definitely, because the rhododendron viscosum is actually in the name of the magnolia bog. It's one of the because it's so dominant or co-dominant as a type, or excuse me, as a plant in there. You get six species, up to six plant species in your scientific name, for the magnolia for a community, and one of them, and it's based, you base it on dominance, so if you sample 300 or whatever number of plots, and rhododendron viscosum was in every one of them in a high cover, then you logically want to put that in as the name.
Rod, I noticed you had the Pityopsis graminifolia bar latifolia. Do you think that's the same thing they have at Patuxent?
It is. It's exactly the same.
Okay. All
It
right.
is, and we were talking about this, Jill, a little earlier, and you know, folks are free to not split if they want to. You know, you don't have, one doesn't have to. It's either Guy Neeson or Semple. I think I can't remember who did a treatment where they sort of split out three varieties or subspecies. I think
Yeah.
a variety of that. So
Mhm.
more recently, they come out pretty clean in the collection. If you look at a lot of material like at the US, you can it sort of fits pretty well. But some of it actually is for a specialist too. I mean, it only is, or another way to say it is only a specialist really interested in splitting those guys out like that. But that's what it's the same plant. It was not introduced there by the Plant Material Center or anyone like that. So
Great. And I like the common name. It's, grass-leaved golden aster instead of silk grass.
Yeah.
I hate those common names that confuse people. So
yes.
I was glad to see that in there.
Yeah, although the hairs on it looks like silk.
Yeah, sure.
Silk hairs coating the blades
Mhm.
of this aster.
Mhm. Yeah, there's another common name that's like silk-leaved golden aster or
I
something.
think so. Yeah.
Like that. So that one's okay too, as long as it doesn't say it's a grass.
Yeah, that's all been mixed.
I had a question about latifolia, the variety latifolium with snails. We use the trinomial, and that satisfies both the splitters and the lumpers. Does putting in the variety satisfy the splitters and lumpers with botany?
It should, I guess, but there's a lot of folks who hate quadrinomials and these longer names, but that doesn't mean we just want to artificialize the process by just jamming something into lumping it, because so much stuff gets lost. Look at, for instance, rhododendron viscosum. Florida, North America, and the two people who did that treatment, or the one person in the treatment, I can't remember, just lumped everything, just found, all this diversity was just thrown out, and you wouldn't even find it by looking into, I mean, they do have a synonymy in there, but it's all lost. And so we don't want that to happen, of course. And it's the value, I mean, that's the danger in and just mindlessly lumping something. Now we don't want everything split into, as Gary Fleming, the retired now Virginia community ecologist, would say, I just don't want to make things unusable and unrecognizable to folks who are actually going to try to use this in the field or, in their work, by having it so complicated, having 8 or 10 different phases of or variants of something when it's really not necessarily different. So
I was really wondering with regards to the importance of wildfires and a pitch pine dominated forest. I mean, you need the wildfires, and you know about this but a lot more than I do, for obviously opening up the cones, burning off the duff so the seeds fall on the ground, causing sprouting from the trunks as well, and secondary sprouting. And without those periodic wildfires, every 40 to 50 years, you'd have an oak-dominated forest. You'd have the oak barrens, not the pine barrens. So, how do you explain this? Because you don't see the evidence of these periodic fires. How do you explain these dominated pine forests?
That's a good question. It's sort of like a chicken and egg thing. But what we've seen is, we had a nice discussion on our solstice walk a couple of days ago on this very same thing. And I'm a big believer in the equilibrium theory, which is, and if you walk through a site like even if you look at the images we saw here, some folks might say, hey, gee, I see a lot of pine duff on the ground that needs to be burned. But I can assure you that as you're walking in there, you know, I mean, it's when a vegetation community gets to a state of balance, it doesn't need to throw energy into mindless reproduction. And nor are there things that are going to come in and take it over either. For instance, our oak forests of the mid-Atlantic along the fall zone or fall line, yes, there's two different things that have happened to them. We didn't have hardly any deer around 100 years ago in either state, Maryland, DC, or Virginia. They just weren't, almost extinct. Over hunted or hunted out of existence pretty much. So we had a lot of successive clearing for firewood back in the, you know, couple hundred years ago. We had, and you know, we had, there wasn't, you know, these things weren't farmed, but the oak forests were consistently cleared. You know, not every 10, 20 years, but every, you know, couple generations or so. And the last time in our area they were cleared was around the Depression, Great Depression, 1930s, early 40s. And as we were transitioning from you know, from rural to bedroom communities slowly. And so a lot of our beech trees that have invaded these forests that we see, they're actually, even though they're small, they're still getting going in these forests. Beech is, for instance, is characteristically typically a plant of the mesic mixed hardwood forest along small streams in our area, not floodplains, but small streams. And that's its habitat. It's moved out into the upland oak forest nearby, opportunistically, slowly. Those, if you know, I've removed, hate doing it, but I've removed beech that are, you know, like 5 and 6 inches, you know, diameter. And on a ring count, those things go back, you know, even 10 years ago, they go back 60 years. So they all date from around the early 1950s or so. And so maybe we had a lot of blue jays moving, a lot more of them then, moving the acorn, the fruits all over the place. Who knows? In the case of the pine barrens, so that's an example of a forest that was or community that was in equilibrium, more or less, that had been artificially exposed. So we have this nice nursery at the forest floor, all this organic material. Sure, things are going to sneak in there like the beech and exploit that. The pine barrens, you know, if you walk through there, you're going to see a lot of little seedlings of pitch pine, but they're just going to hang there for decades. Not even as a sapling. You could, you know, they might be an 80-inch seedling for many years, but until they get light, they're not going to do anything. And you don't find a lot of blowdowns of pitch pine. It's an old, it's unlike the successional Virginia pine. So, you know, the forest is at a nice balance, and where you do have a light gap or whatever, or if there's an old stump somewhere, sure, there's so much pitch pine seed that comes around, and you don't, you know, some ecologists think that, you know, because they were taught this, that fire is the answer to everything, and that pitch pine needs fire to open and to for the seeds to spring out of and that's just patently false. Yeah. Thank you, guys. And please, there's a lot of, there may be some questions that weren't answered or weren't, maybe my answers were lame or not understood. So please send them to me or to the Plant Society. And I know the Plant Society does a great job of sending them on to the folks that can help. So please do that, and I will be more than happy to email you back and try to give you an answer, or a clearer answer, or more information, or better reading, or further reading, or whatever. So thank
Great.
you all.
Hey,
Appreciate it.
Rod, do you want to just tell people your email address
Oh,
for a
yes.
few people? Okay, thanks. That
Okay,
might be best.
excellent. It's Simmons, that's SIMMONS 22041 @gmail.com. And be happy to send photos, or, anything I've got, that can help. I'll be happy to send it out to you.